Good morning. Often in life, in my work, and maybe you've experienced this, sometimes you have like a vision of what I'd love to do. Maybe builders, dream of building a building. But in the field of mental health, one of the visions I've always had is, wouldn't that be cool if, one vision I had was that if the church had a marriage prep program that was orthodox, and people say, well, we don't have that, we don't do that. And, you kind of follow your dream, and when you follow your dream in the church, you never know how it's going to turn out. And, we let go and we trust. And some of my dreams, my wife will say, that's just a crazy dream. And there's really no way to tell, but you pursue your dreams, and some of them turn out and some of them don't. And when you have a dream that actually turns out, the deep sense of joy and fulfillment that comes from that dream is so deep, it doesn't really matter after that. Well, this particular dream is a dream that I've had that has been the dream of many others that I've known. And that is the dream of the church gathering experts in mental health. Orthodox, faithful Orthodox who are experts in mental health, and collaborating with us to actually identify and address the mental health needs of the church. And I don't know if it was a crazy dream I had. I knew it was a dream. And then when I came to Ocamper as a student, I realized that's the vision of Ocamper. That Ocamper is a group of medical, mental health professionals and theologians to really address the needs of the church. And Ocamper has always had a vision of being the pastoral care, or the mental health arm of the church in America. Now, that was our dream. I'm never sure it was the bishop's dream, but increasingly over the last 35 years, our communities are really starting to come to terms with the fact that Orthodox Christians are not immune to mental illness. And as that has become more apparent, I know bishops are confronted and priests are confronted with issues that are really mental illness related. And to try and do pastoral care when there's an issue of mental illness is really problematic for everyone. And I've noticed that the priests have been turning to the bishops, and the bishops have been looking around for assistance. Well, 2 years ago, the Assembly of Canonical Orthodox Bishops in America approached Ocamper and requested that Ocamper set up a task force, a mental health task force, to identify and address the mental health needs of the church. And there was joy heard around the country for every member and former member of Ocamper, because we realized this is how we have self-identified as an organization. And now the bishops have gathered to say, please do this. Over the last 2 years, we've organized a task force in collaboration with the Assembly of Bishops. You'll hear more about that today. But at some point, we went to the bishops and said, if we really want to do this, this can't be done by a group of volunteers. The work is too much, and we need to be committed to this particular ministry in the form of resources and staffing. And they said yes. And the product of that is our presenter today, the program coordinator of the mental health task force, Sangeetha Thomas. And just when I thought that, Ocamper is filled with passionate, committed, hardworking people who have a vision about what to do, along comes Sangeetha, who has more passion, more commitment, and a greater vision to bring together, imagine her role of coordinating between the Assembly of Bishops and Ocamper through the Mental Health Task Force. So it is my honor and delight to welcome and introduce to you Sangeetha Thomas, the program coordinator, and hear from her about the Mental Health Task Force. But I don't want you just to listen. I want to invite you to hear what she is saying. And when we understand what it means to hear, is not just to listen. It is an invitation. It is an invitation at this time, as Orthodox. This is the time for all of us who hear this to step in and email Sangeetha after this and say, what do you need from me? While there might be a lot to do, there are also a lot of us. And I want you to listen and hear and follow up with an email, but I don't want to delay anymore. Sangeetha, please join me in welcoming Sangeetha Thomas for her talk on the Mental Health Task Force.
Thank you. Thank you. Can you hear me okay? All right. Well, good morning, everyone. We have a handout. I don't know why I keep saying we. It's just me. I have a handout. If you came in a few minutes late, I'm going to just set these right here in the front. Help yourself or ask your neighbor to pass it down to you. That handout is designed for you to be able to participate in the discussion that's in the second half. So those are the discussion questions that we're going to be talking through about halfway through this presentation. So if you want to go ahead and jot down your notes as the data is being presented to you, then we can just hop right into it once we get started. So thank you, Dr. Mamalakis, for introducing me and giving a little bit of background on the history between the Assembly of Bishops and the Mental Health Task Force. It is our mission to understand what the mental health needs are of the Orthodox Christian people, and then to develop resources that meet those needs. And our intention is that these resources are not just going to be for GoArch or just for the Antiochian Church. It's going to be pan-Orthodox. And you will see that in the survey that we have done. So I do want to introduce, before I get started, a couple of members of the Mental Health Task Force who are here: Dr. Mamalakis, Dr. Randa Anderson, Father John, who is here, waving in the back. I think that's everyone. If you all met Dr. Naveen, she is also part of the Mental Health Task Force. So we do have quite a bit of overlap between OCAMPER's board and the Mental Health Task Force. So you've met a few of us. We are among you. So let me start with giving you a quick overview of the programs that we have already executed. The first one that we had launched is the Directory of Orthodox Christian Mental Health Professionals. You all received a flyer, or at least you saw a flyer that was helping you get more information on that. We have right now launched that resource as of December of 2020. We have about over 100 verified providers in this directory already. So by verified, what I mean is they are licensed in their state as a mental health provider. They're also, or a credentialed substance abuse professional. They're also verified by their priest to be in good sacramental standing with the Eastern or Oriental Orthodox Church. And right now we have providers across 37 states, and we are adding new ones every week. Several of those providers do provide telehealth services, so they are able to cover the entirety of whatever states they are licensed in. And we have a couple of folks on there who are available for professional consultation, not necessarily clinical work, but you can see all of that by going on there, typing in the state. You can type in Texas and find me on there, and then you can see their full profile. Okay, the second big program that we did is the National Orthodox Christian Mental Health Needs Assessment. So this was launched and administered between April and August of this year. We received responses from 1,636 total participants, including both clergy and laity. And our results represented a diversity of 15 different Orthodox Christian jurisdictions across the U.S. So this workshop is going to focus on the findings from that assessment. And I'm just going to highlight some of the key portions. We're in the process of conducting a higher level statistical analysis and developing a comprehensive report. And that's going to come out in a little bit more time, because there were 36 different survey questions, and you do not want to sit here and watch me report on all of that. So I'm going to highlight the big ticket items. The second half of this workshop is really going to be a discussion. It is our invitation to you all to give us your direct input and to enter into that space of discussing the data, interpreting the data, and possibly even exploring opportunities for what the implications of that data might be for ministry and for Orthodox Christians. So we really want your input as medical and theological and mental health professionals. Okay, so please feel free to use that handout. I am going to try and collect that handout at the end, unless you run away with it. And so please do put whatever feedback, even if you don't get a chance to come up to the microphone, write it down and I will pick it up. If you want to stay anonymous, you can. If you want to, at the very bottom, there is a box where you can put your name and your contact information. If you would like to volunteer with us or if you just want to learn more, you can do that as well. Okay, so our assessment had 5 major sections. We measured the perceptions on mental health, which is really addressing things like stigma. The second section was on experience with mental health. Third one was on the role of the church. Fourth, we had a demographics section. And then the last section was specifically for clergy and pastoral caregivers to answer a few questions about their experience with mental health in their role. So let's start with demographics, because you should know who's actually participating. With gender, we had almost a 60-40 split, the majority being female. And then here is our age distribution. And what you'll see here, that dotted line is about where 10% would be. So about 50% of our total participants were within the combined age ranges of 33 to 47 and 58 to 67. And here's the breakdown by Orthodox Christian jurisdiction. So we intentionally designed this survey to be as inclusive as possible. All of the churches or jurisdictions that are listed on the left-hand side were provided on the assessment itself. And we tried our best to include as many Eastern and Oriental Orthodox Christian jurisdictions as possible. So the way that broke down with our survey participants is about 30% from the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese, about 28% from the OCA, roughly 20% from Antiochian, and all other jurisdictions came out to about 22%, and that all other category includes 13 different Orthodox Christian jurisdictions. So we are very proud of that. I know it's not an even distribution, but we are very proud of that diversity that we've been able to achieve here. And here we have the breakdown by geography. One thing you won't see in the image here, because I couldn't figure out how to show it, is we actually had a couple of folks who were overseas. They are serving overseas in the armed forces, and just want to say out loud how grateful, if they are listening, how grateful we are for their sacrifice, and but also for the dedication to sign in from a U.S. Armed Forces base somewhere in the world to participate in that. So here are our top states. Anybody here from Pennsylvania? Yeah, big cash prize for you, Pennsylvania. Came in number 1, almost 10%. All right. And we're going to go straight into the next section here, which is on the perceptions on mental health. So our participants were asked to rate these statements on a 5-point scale from strongly disagree, which we weighted at 1, a score of 1, and then strongly agree, which we weighted at a score of 5. So for the statement, I am comfortable seeking help for myself from a mental health professional, the average weighted score came out to about 3.96 out of 5, closest to the rating agree. And then we have them rate the statement, I am comfortable suggesting someone else seek help from a mental health professional. And that average score came out to about 4.09 out of 5, also very close to agree. So I'm going to go into the experience section here. We asked the question, do you have a family member that has struggled with mental health issues? And the responses are about almost 87% yes. of course, naturally, the next question, have you personally struggled with mental health issues in your lifetime? And about 77% of our survey participants answered yes. So now we're going to go into what exactly is it that these individuals are reporting they're struggling with. I do want to disclaimer, we provided about 47 possible options off of a list. They were asked to check all that apply. This self-report survey does not necessarily indicate the prevalence of mental health illnesses or clinical diagnoses in this population. It's really, we use these terms kind of generally. So the word anxiety was an option on a list. That does not necessarily mean everybody has clinical anxiety. They might believe that they have symptoms associated with anxiety, or they might experience anxiousness. Same thing with depression, same thing with everything else, so on and so forth. So you will see that in here, and I'm only listing the top 15. So let's see. Anxiety, depression, and loneliness as the top 3. I'm going to give you a second to just read those. And I want to insert an extra piece of information, which is not directly from our survey. And just as a reminder, our survey was conducted between April and August of 2021. And last year, Mental Health America conducted a data analysis based on their self-screening tool, which I think many of you are familiar with, where individuals can anonymously go online, take their mental health screening, and see if they screen for anxiety or depression or PTSD or an eating disorder. They have quite a few on Mental Health America's website. So what they did was they took all the data from January to September of 2020. So that's a year, almost a year prior to our survey. And they tracked data from 1.5 million screeners anonymously. And they tabulated that to find this, 1 year before ours. That there is an increase of reports in moderate to severe anxiety, moderate to severe depression, loneliness, as well as suicidal ideation. So I'm not going to stand here and tell you what to think, but I am going to encourage you to maybe think about that, jot down those thoughts on that handout, and we are going to discuss that and what that might mean here in the second half of our workshop. So I don't have the URL to that survey on here, but the name of that, the report from MHA is COVID-19 and mental health, a growing crisis. It was published in October of 2020, and it's available on their website. All right, so since this conference is all about COVID, we did have 2 questions that were COVID specific. We did ask our participants, have your mental health concerns been directly or indirectly exacerbated as a result of COVID-19? And again, this one was on a 5-point scale ranging from not at all to extremely, which we weighted and found an average score of 2.32 out of 5, which is closest to the item slightly on our survey. And then we asked, has your parish's ability to provide mental health support changed as a result of COVID-19? And that weighted score out of 5 was 2.94. So that scale was from much worse to much better out of 5, and their rating closest to stayed the same. Okay, so what was done to address the concerns indicated above? This is what our survey participants reported that they did in response to whatever mental health concerns they reported in the previous question. So the top 2 responses that we got were that they confided in a family, friend, or colleague, and the second one was that they sought self-study. Now, since this is an O-Camper conference, I feel like I should highlight the professionals who are here. So we have priest and clergy. Speaking to priest or clergy at about 54%. About 47% said that they sought professional therapy or counseling. And then about 42% said that they spoke with their doctor. Okay, so this is the only question I'm going to be presenting where we actually created a subgroup within our data. So like I said, we had 1636 total participants, and for this one we wanted to show the separation between lay participants and clergy participants, because it is important for this question, which we ask, would you utilize clergy and or professional mental health services for assistance with mental health problems? So you'll see we gave the option of both, clinical only, clergy or pastoral care only, neither do something else, or neither don't want services. And you'll see in the gold color is clergy participants. So about 83% of the clergy that we had, which is about 233 out of our data set, said that they were willing to utilize both. And that leaves about 1403 non-clergy participants who said they would be 66%. Said they would be willing to utilize both. Okay, so what would help them increase their likelihood? This was a free response question, which we coded and found that generally speaking, our participants said they would be more likely to utilize pastoral care or clinical care if they had greater accessibility. And accessibility could mean geographic accessibility, especially those who are living in rural areas, or it could mean financial accessibility of both or either clergy or clinical professionals. Then we had several respondents who indicated that clergy training in mental health or in how to speak with people, how to listen, any number of things got coded as clergy training. And then we had several participants who said trust and safety. Some of the items that were coded under trust and safety were things like confidentiality, and just having the security that they could go, that it was not stigmatized. And then, of course, destigmatization. Many of the participants said that if they knew that the church was open to this, or if they knew that it was okay, they would go. And then we also had participants who said they would seek services if it got worse, which anybody who's a clinician here knows, does it have to get worse before you go? And that's always the question that we ask. And I wanted to point that out. All right. So, since we are a mental health task force that is dedicated to creating resources after assessing for the needs that we have, we did want to ask them, what sorts of resources would you like to see coming from the Orthodox Church? And we provided a list of 9 potential options and asked them to rate them on a scale, a 3-point scale, from not important to extremely important at 3. And so overwhelmingly, our participants said that the Directory of Mental Health Professionals was the most important resource. Below that, support group referrals and presentations and book recommendations. So that's reassuring to know that the directory that we've already created and are continuing to grow is seen as the most important resource that we could have provided. And that came out to about 2.54 out of 3. Okay, so we did ask a couple of questions specifically to clergy. Like I said before, there was 233 clergy participants or pastoral care providers, and we asked them, how often do you intervene in mental health related situations in your parish? And this is the breakdown that we received. The majority, almost 50%, said that they intervene in mental health situations less than a few times per year. And then about 33% said a few times per year. So I do want to encourage or remind you that this is a subgroup of our data, so it's not a huge group, right? And so please jot down any notes you have on that and what that might mean on your notes, and of course we'll discuss that here in a minute. But we did ask our clergy what resources would they like to see us produce that would help support mental health care in their parish, and these were some of the free responses that came out. Knowing when and to whom to refer. Clergy training, so clergy themselves are requesting additional training. Community education, presentations on mental health, and then support with specific concerns or specific populations. All right, so now we're at the discussion. So it is 11:01. We have about 30 minutes-ish. And so I do want to, the discussion questions are the same ones that I provided to you. So let's start with the first one. And we'll take any general feedback, any general thoughts on this, on the data that was presented, as well as any patterns that you noticed or anything that was surprising to you. So let's start with that one. Yeah, you can, good. Let's go ahead and use the microphone.
I wrote down 2 patterns that I noticed. I thought it was interesting that when you compared the national study of mental health concerns with yours, that other than suicide, the other 3 were right in line with each other. That was really interesting. Mm-hmm. I think, am I on the right track? With
the question I can go back to that. Oops, hold on. I'm going to take a minute. There we go. This one.
I thought that was fascinating. Mm-hmm. But then to jump back to where you were at the very end, I'm a therapist. I do not mean to question the clergy, but I'm in shock that they mentioned the infrequency of mental health interventions. That was interesting to me.
Yeah.
I think it's happening more frequently, but maybe we have different definitions.
Yeah. It's a good observation. Yeah, I heard some murmurs in the audience about that. It sounds like a lot of y'all agree that that was maybe surprising.
Yeah, I get it back in my face. Yes, I was surprised by the low report of clergy intervention, but I think it's probably largely part of that the abysmal clergy training, or just at least information on mental health issues and such. So I think they're probably running into it far more than they recognize. I mean, anybody in distress is probably facing some kind of mental health concern. But there's also a weird back and forth between being concerned about being overly medical about spiritual and emotional crises. That's one, and the other one then is under awareness of what those things look like. I've had many brother priests call me and say, "Hey, I got this veteran and he's talking about this stuff and I have no idea what he's talking about." And the word trauma never comes out of their mouth until I say it. Oh, psychological trauma. That's interesting. Are you kidding me? So we need, I think this probably goes hand in hand with the clergy. This is a passion of mine because I straddle both worlds as a marriage and family therapist and as a priest. And so the need to educate clergy on mental health issues without clinicalizing the priesthood is going to be an interesting thing, and it's something that I'm particularly fired up about. So yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do want to make clear that that is not our goal, but how do we straddle that line, and that's the question we've been asking. So I appreciate you saying that.
We have several comments. You're tall. We have several comments in the chat from our online audience. Father Dean Alcuin Kellerhouse comments, high number of faithful willing to seek assistance from clergy. Laura Emerson notes, I also was surprised about the paucity of mental health interventions done by clergy, but maybe clergy see these crises as spiritual problems, not psychological ones. Margaret Tedros notes, both laity and clergy identify the need for more training for clergy for mental health issues. And Father Alcuin asks, any thought to recommending curricula changes for those who are preparing for ordination? Ooh, let's get right to the source.
Yeah.
I like that.
That's
That's
great.
what I have for now.
That's great. That's a great question, enticing question. Let's prepare them from the womb. All right. So let's go to the next. Were there any piggyback comments or questions or additional patterns that anyone wanted to add before we move to the next question? Okay. I do think you all had a great point that in the previous slide when we talked about clergy experience, the question as it's stated is, how often are you asked to intervene in mental health related situations? So that phrase, mental health related situations, might be some of the hang up. It seems like that's what some of y'all are poking at, is that what is a mental health related situation and who recognizes it as that or something else. So that is a very valid point, and I appreciate that being pointed out. All right, second discussion question. So you all know, as well as I do, especially if you're in the psych field, that there are already plenty of resources by Mental Health America, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, you name any acronym, it's already out there. So why are we creating more? And how do we create more without just recreating the wheel or taking something that already exists and orthodoxifying it as our own? That's not a word, but I'm going to use it. Father Sean, we should just get you your own mic.
I'll just wear one. No, it's interesting to me. I think people are in desperate need of guidance in this area that's sanctioned by the church, and I think that's what we're trying to do, especially with the directory and some other things that people maybe they want to engage the mental health community, but they want guidance. It seems like they want guidance in that area that's sanctioned by the church, that's somehow given credibility by the ecclesiastical communities in which they live. I think that's interesting. And then rather than just recreating, taking somebody else's pamphlet and stamping a triple bar cross on it, it seems to me that these kind of issues, anxiety, depression, suicide, etc., they to be looked at specifically through the lens of Orthodox theological anthropology, like what we believe about the human person. Mm-hmm. I think when you do that, you get some very interesting results, and I don't think they negate the clinical observations. They simply fill them out, because often the clinical ones can be can be quite reductive, and we're trying to avoid that without dismissing science and the clinical insights. And so the anthropology comes along and fills in and fills out and opens up those categories. So I think that's part of the challenge, the theological piece, rather than just taking somebody else's thing on depression and putting it in a different format, but actually filtering it through or looking at it by means of our incarnational theological anthropology. That would be, I think, helpful.
Absolutely. Something more than just telling people to just pray about it. Yeah, absolutely.
Hi. I've retired from a few professions. Right now I'm training chaplains. And there's in the past, in the long past, there was a woeful lack of attention to clinical pastoral education and seminary training. And CPE is CPE no matter who teaches it, although it has developed quite a bit in the years that it's existed. My dream at this point would be that we develop more CPE supervisors who are also Orthodox Christians. Having said that, the chaplain group that Sarah Byrne Martinelli is trying to get connected with, I think could participate in a way with you in terms of not just training seminarians, but also helping to create some kind of mental health educational resources.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I'm nervous in the microphone. I would just say that there's still stigma and bias and personal projections that come whether you're an Orthodox Christian or not. So until clergy or anyone really could be a safe place to go and share those, because I'm reflecting on, well, if my parish priest happens to be my father, so if it wasn't a family member, would I feel comfortable going to my parish priest if I had some sort of mental health issue that I would want to disclose? And I'm not sure that I would because of that stigma and bias that still exists.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. That's a sentiment that's reflected by several of our survey participants, and I would hope that the resources would at least touch on the fact that we are open, the clergy are willing, the hierarchs are willing, we have the blessing from the church to do this and destigmatize it by recognizing it. So, but I appreciate that sentiment. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Hi. I would like to see the possibility of the conversation switching when the clergy on the front line are responding to crisis or spiritual and or emotional issues. Mm-hmm. That the conversation moves from either or, not just spiritual or mental health, but both and. A little closer. Thank you.
Yes.
So I think that would be really productive for us when Father Sean brought up trauma or those anxiety, depression, suicide, the list of that we began to have a conversation about addressing both instead of deciding one or the other.
Yes, absolutely. And knowing the boundaries between each profession and the strengths of each profession and what they each have to offer to the layperson, right? Yes.
Me again. It says how can we create resources?
Yes.
So I'm spinning a lot and trying to think about it, and I'm wondering if similar to the directory of just names, if we could have a directory of articles we write, not blogs, but like thoughts that we have.
Yeah.
I was talking to Father Chris Lammy last night. The model that I practice is called relational life therapy, and it was created by a random guy named Terry Real, who's culturally Jewish, and yet the entire model lines up beautifully with orthodoxy, which is part of my talk today. And if we were able, and I know I'm not the only one that uses a model that is secular, that lines up, and if the information was just more out there, maybe even just on a website or something, I'm not sure, but a way for all of us to be talking to each other more and more quickly with technology. Yes. So maybe just, like I said, like a directory, but that's with articles and papers and stuff, mm-hmm. where the things blend.
Yes.
So.
Yes. Absolutely. So this is for those who are
but I want it to be out there. We all want it to be out there.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things we'll talk about at the OCamper membership meeting is that we have an updated and more useful website ready for things like articles, blog posts, that we write ourselves, resources. So that is definitely in the works. And Vicki, I have your phone number. So there we
Awesome. That was Dr. Randa Anderson, by the way, for anyone who's virtual and can't see her face.
Thank you. Great. A couple comments from the chat from our online audience. Father Kellerhouse noted, we Orthodox resist separating the spiritual from the mental. We are committed to holistic care rather than just treating symptoms. On CPE, my DMin research revealed that CPE is not intended to prepare to provide counseling, and I believe CPE is the chaplain's training. So another person, that's clinical pastoral education. Thank you, Father Dean. Laura Emerson noted the term I wanted to, she's asking, I think, and this is reiterating what Vicki just said, for Orthodox therapists to please write more books and hold more workshops at these conferences. And look, she volunteered to do one herself. So, Laura, I'm going to reach out to you for next year. I believe we do have some authors in this room, Philip Mamalakis and Dr. Harris. And if I've missed anyone else, I'm sorry. But.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think it's great untapped market for us in this field of Orthodox psychotherapy. And what is that phrase? And what does that mean? And what can that look like? And different theoretical lenses for that.
I think that facilitating kind of the equivalent of focus groups at things like diocesan assemblies would go a long ways. If a particular bishop opens the door for that, and you sit down with clergy from a diocese or a jurisdiction, and you ask them questions like, what kinds of things do you encounter in your parish with regard to mental health? I think that even people that wouldn't warm to the concept of mental health as a construct would find ways to begin participating in that and buying into it if they feel like they're contributing to it. And so they don't feel like it's a program that's imposed upon them or some kind of educational program that they're innately averse to begin with. It's something where you draw them in. I think that would help.
Absolutely. And you mean that specifically for clergy?
Yeah, I'm thinking clergy in particular. I found myself with the data wondering about just the self-selection process. There's so many clergy that would not participate in a survey like that, and many Orthodox people, because they're way on the other end of the scale with regard to even accepting the notion of mental health as being a valid construct. And so I think that, again, if the bishops open the door, then you could sit down and I think get people on board by encouraging them to talk about how they work that out, and so they feel like they're kind of the advisors in a sense, and then bring them together in a kind of collaboration. And I think there'd be much more likely buy-in as a result of that.
Right. Yeah, that's a very valid point, that if we listen, then we can meet the needs better than if we just try and throw something at them, right? Yeah. Yes. Hello.
Okay, so I'm thinking about how we publicize, and I work for a school district, and our employee assistance program, they have a tab on our website. It's very well publicized, and I think we were talking on the shuttle yesterday. I think it would be fantastic if every jurisdiction had a very well publicized tab for resources on their websites that either links to the assembly's directory and resources or whatnot, that every youth group on their page was linked to resources, and just that we're spreading and papering it everywhere and not just hiding it and tucking it here, but that we're talking about it and marketing it as best as we can.
Actually, one small piggybacking on that, again, don't know if it's feasible. But what if each jurisdiction had someone on the staff that was their main job for each jurisdiction, to just to be there with even the individual bishop or metropolitan or archbishop, and just doesn't need to provide direct commentary, but just being that resource on a daily basis to keep all the parishes together, maybe even parish level, but that dynamic, that piece there.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I can't make any promises, but all things are possible through Christ, or so I've been told. But yeah, that is a great idea that it would open up lots of links and connections and relationships.
I'm going to defend CPE, although I haven't been through it. I kind of wish I had been. It's absolutely correct that CPE is not really a great preparation for psychotherapy or for counseling. But clergy going through, more Orthodox supervisors and more clergy going through CPE. What CPE really does is drives you into yourself in a way that nothing else does. Most chaplains in the Army run from CPE because they don't want to go through that level of self-scrutiny or being looked at by other students so carefully and closely. For Orthodox Christians, CPE should be a beautiful thing because it strips you naked and lays you bare before the gaze of other people. And if everyone's created in the image of God, then we're all looking. You're being looked at by God. In essence, it's humble. It's humiliating. It can be humiliating. It can be humbling. You learn things about how you react and respond in ways that you don't even know, or you're totally unaware of, because somebody else points them out. Why did you move your head like that when you started talking about that patient? I don't know. And people don't like to be scrutinized like that. But what it does is it creates a level of self-awareness in the face of difficulty, of other people's difficulties and struggles, that most people have no clue that they just totally freak out when they walk into a hospital room or when somebody. And so, I think a lot of parishioners, I could be way off base here, and I'm not trying to be judgmental. This is probably true even of me at times. People turn away from their clergy somewhat unconsciously because they can read in body language that person's not ready to hear what I'm about to say. Mm-hmm. And when you go through CPE, and that has a great effect on making one aware of those kinds of unconscious body languages and postures, even in confession. So I think it's not good. It's not preparation for mental health work. It's preparation for encountering mental health crises and not poorly responding to people. So yeah. I just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah. Yes, that's incredibly valuable. And I think that points specifically to what you had mentioned before, that we're not trying to clinicalize clergy. We're just trying to insert a space where the research on, for example, working with trauma can be utilized, right? And I think any one of us who works with trauma know about co-regulation and dysregulation and the reason why some trauma patients will resist. And it's not because they're resistant people. It's because we're dysregulated and they don't feel safe with us. So yeah, that's incredibly valuable, and I appreciate the clarification on CPEs as well. All right, we have a couple minutes left. I'm going to go to the third question. You know as well as I do that there are way more than 1,636 Orthodox Christians in the United States. So what do you identify as a possible barrier between us and the people? And we do our best I do my best in my role to get all the marketing out. I know several of the clergy here have gotten spammed by me over the summer. Plenty of emails being sent out. But what do you see as a possible barrier between our initiatives as an organization, as a task force, and the average layperson or the ministerial level? For example, if we're going to do another survey, or if we're going to create a podcast, or if we are going to create a video series, how do we get to the people?
It's a great question. Let's anticipate some obstacles in preparation to overcome them, right? I think what we've already seen in distributing the directory and the survey is communication channels. Because orthodoxy in America is not fully unified, although we do have the assembly that is a unifying force, channels of information are still rather separate. And even when the communication does get out there effectively, people don't always read it. And so I think so much of what happens still needs personal connection and promotion, and there are only so many of us. So I'm glad you're doing this, then hopefully everyone in this room is inspired to participate. But in general, I would say communication, getting the word out, is a big challenge.
Absolutely. Any other thoughts on that? Okay. I am going to end with just a little bit of information on how to stay connected with what the Mental Health Task Force does. So since we are under the umbrella of the Assembly of Bishops, you'll find all the news about what we're doing as a task force is through the Assembly of Bishops website or our social media. The handle is the same across all of our platforms, so Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. You'll find us at Assembly of Bishops. And then, of course, the public email box to reach us is ministries@assemblyofbishops.org. I do want to just recognize, we are so incredibly grateful that our hierarchs recognize that mental health is a need and then commissioned a mental health task force. Incredibly grateful to Ocamphor for creating a space for us to present and for Ancient Faith for making it possible that other people can watch this podcast, can learn about the survey data. And I'm not sure who our survey participants are, if you're here in the audience or if you're out there in the virtual world. But thank you to each of you, because I would not be able to present half of the stuff I did if you hadn't participated. So we are very grateful for the vulnerability and the courage of participating in that with us. And we're looking very much forward to continuing to serve the mental health needs of all Orthodox Christians in the U.S. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Sangeetha. Don't go anywhere. We could see that even asking the questions about mental health and the church raises up a lot of issues to address. And when we think about it, this is the beauty of the church trying to have a conversation about mental health, increasing awareness, decreasing stigma, but also helping us understand how we understand something like mental health as Orthodox. Because I think we would clearly identify that just to talk about mental health might be a really narrow way of thinking about how we might understand something called mental health. And that clearly, while if someone is struggling with anxiety, their personal faith, their encounter with Christ is going to have an effect on that. But then just a faith in Christ, how does that relate to really struggling with mental illness? And so right away, these conversations are raising these types of issues. Because what I was struck by the list, is instinctively we're going to psychoeducation, right? Let's teach them about anxiety. Let's help them understand depression. And clearly the Mental Health Task Force is going to do psychoeducation. There needs to be information. But then the fourth one on the list, loneliness, what are we going to do? Send a flyer to someone who's lonely and say, if you can understand cognitively what loneliness is, right away we see that mental health or mental illness or struggling, there's something else going on as a culture in our communities that we could say in many ways the church has always had a response to. What's the response to loneliness? Well, if I'm isolated in my parents' basement, online, all of us would lose our minds. And so these are the types of, this takes some thought. These are the types of conversations that the Mental Health Task Force is going to be having with theologians, with clinicians, with physicians, to understand what is our response to persons. As church, how do we reach out to persons and invite them into these types of conversations in the context of relationships, and then with the clergy, with the laity, and the bishops? So right away, two things. Right away, we've completely overlapped with the vision of Ocamphor. And right away we realized this is a large, ongoing endeavor. So Ocamper is committed to tag teaming with the Mental Health Task Force and being clear that we're not interested in solving a problem, but really inviting people into communion, into relationship. And how do you do that? That's not going to be an email, right? That's not going to be watch a video. It's just us growing as church, moving forward as church intentionally with a clear understanding of what mental illness is and how we nurture this wholeness of persons. So I'm excited about that. It's great to have you on board. We anticipate at Ocamper every year to get an update on the Mental Health Task Force, all the cool types of projects and programs and also relationships we're building, conversations we're nurturing. So we look forward to everyone's ongoing involvement. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
At this point, our next event is lunch, which will be back where we eat on the little terrace area outside the main hall. And part of our Saturday lunch is always a membership meeting. This is the time once a year where all the members of Ocamper gather. We have some business to attend to, but as mental health professionals and medical professionals, theologians, no one got into this for administration, so we try and get the administration finished, so we can actually have conversations about the state of the organization. What have we been up to, and what do we want to be doing as we move forward, which is having conversations about what is meaningful to all of us. So please join us for lunch and then a business meeting. And those of you online will be able to watch virtually. Thank you very much.